Poetry. It was always obvious to me that if anyone was ever going to be a reasonable analyst in human design, that at some level there had to be a poet in them. It's about keynoting, and it's about being able to play with language. It's something I enjoy. It's something that I find inspiring at times. What happens when you link things together? It's like the magic of the way we speak words when the mind doesn't have words. It has components. You put the components together one way and you get one word, and you put the components together another way and you get another word. And everything about looking at anyone's design is that you have the possibility of being able to describe in a way their genetic predisposition. Keynoting is magical because human design as a logical revelation is something that is deeply rooted in its formulas. And yet formulas are something that are meaningless unless they are very precise. Language is very much a part of what our work is. Language is what consciousness is about. It is through this venue that we can raise awareness and consciousness. And so keynoting becomes something that is very special. What I want to take you through tonight, or today, is a little bit of poetry. And as I have done with the first semester, and as I will do throughout, it'll be my little tradition to close with a mystical story. But first to the poetry. You can look at this information in two ways. One way is that you can look at it through genetic continuity. So for example, if you're looking at this graph, first notice that we're dealing with the lower trigram first. We're dealing with the first, second, and third lines. And then we're dealing with the stream moving from the bottom up, moving from the pressure, the 19, going up to the 20. So in terms of genetic continuity, if you're somebody that has a 1 in your profile, that this information and its these components as they come together, that this is an underlying thematic of what it is to carry a first line in your profile. And the same can be true of the second line and the third, and so forth and so on. And it is particularly significant in looking at it this way to look at it within the context of the personality. That is what we can in fact be conscious of. The second way that you can look at that is specific. In other words, you can look at the activations that you have or somebody else has in the stream itself and the lines themselves. And then you will see that you have what is a chain, if you will. A chain that doesn't follow a perfect symmetry. In other words, a chain that has nothing to do with genetic continuity, but a chain in that sense in which you're seeing the specific movement of the energies as it moves from line to line and gate to gate and so forth and so on. And obviously, it will be a very rare thing indeed to see somebody have the host stream. There's going to be gaps as well. But it will give you an insight into the imprinting at the mystical level of what their activations actually are about. But I think for the purposes of this conclusion to looking at the mystical stream, that what I'd like you to take from this is that I'm giving you the key to the mystic in all of us. I mean, that's what it is. Through the genetic continuity, and I think this is the way that it's best used. Through the genetic continuity, you get an underlying insight into that thematic at the personality level. So, for example, let's begin. Let's talk about the 1-3s and the 1-4s. Obviously, what they have in common is they have a first-line personality. Now, let's look at this movement, because it's a beautiful movement. the pressure to wonder or not. You'll notice, by the way, that the or nots, are only mentioned here at the very bottom. It's always something to recognize that everything about being a binary is about the on and off switch. And to understand that at any point in this process, when there is a lack of correctness, and after all, this is about correctness, at any one of these levels, this can break down. So it is something to keep in mind. But I want to be able to do the keynoting for you in a very basic way so you get the sense of it. The pressure to wonder leads to the altering of forms through principles. This here is the beginning of the mystical spiritual process. So if you're a first line being, where you begin, what the root of your mysticism is a pressure to wonder that ultimately is going to alter form through principles. And those principles, given the one and its investigation, are something that are going to have to be discovered. But then there's the bridge. And what the bridge represents is whether you are going to be tied to your roots or whether you are going to spread your wings, because it's really what it's about. And it is always a movement. So in the beginning of the process, the first line behaves according to the elders' tradition until they begin to struggle with the rules of the elders. If you're a first line being, if you're a 4037, this is what is at work within that. Behaving according to the tradition until one begins to struggle with the rules. And it is the struggling with the rules that leads to the potential of the mystical transformation, which is all here. And that mystical transformation is empowered by challenge to be uncontrived, to be modest on the mundane path. The pressure to wonder leads to the mundane path. The altering of form through principles leads to the mundane path. And the mundane path is built on being empowered by challenge. The challenge to be uncontrived. The challenge to be modest. And to live correctly on the mundane plane. This is the movement. Now think about something. When you're looking at this dynamic, we all have this at the bottom. This is the magic of the 4919, and this is the drama of our cycle, the closing of this, the change that's coming in 2027, the mutation that's coming. Because there will no longer be this dynamic, adrenalized, emotionalized pressure. It won't be there anymore. But as long as it is there, it isn't something that in and of itself mutates. It doesn't. It doesn't carry the mutative of the individuality of the 51 to the 20. It doesn't. It creates a foundation upon which, if one gets across the bridge, that one can meet the other side and go through the mutation of initiation and awakening. And so the challenge for the 1949 is this movement. And you can't skip it, if you know what I mean. It's inherent in what it is to be a first-line being. And you see all first-line children. They will behave according to their elders until they begin to struggle with the rules. And this is what is natural for them. And by the way, so many of them are, how can I put this, stripped down, humiliated, denied the moment they engage in that struggle. This is not an easy bridge to cross. Never. But it's there in every first-line being. It's there in every first-line being to get to a point in which no rule has a right to hold them. This is the only thing that ultimately will bring them the empowerment to get to a point of being uncontrived and modest on the mundane path and fulfill their potential. The second line. The pressure to receive the call alters the form through planning. It is the adrenalized foundation. The call, receiving the call, the pressure to receive the call alters the form through planning. See, if there is no mutation to this, these are beings that'll pray every night with, well, no expectation of an answer. They have a phase to go through. They have a ritual to go through. They have to go across the bridge. And they will begin with following the tradition of the elders until they struggle with its social demands. And it tells you something about every second line being. That until they struggle with the social demands of the elders, until they struggle with the social demand of the elders is not just simply thinking about parents, thinking about priests, thinking about cultural rules, social rules, moral rules, all of the things that are wrapped up in all of that. And the social demands to obey those things, and the social requirements, until there is a struggle, there is no potential to break free. And the struggle cannot simply just be struggle. As I say, this is a bridge to be crossed. That in the genetic continuity, every second line being, every 2-4, every 2-5, that this is what the personality must go through. And if the personality is going to be awakened, then the personality is going to have to struggle with the social demands so that they can withdraw from disorder, to be in the now, to be independent on the narrow path. The pressure to receive the call leads to the narrow path, leads to the withdrawal from disorder, leads to the existential perfection of the independence of being on the narrow path. It's there for every two. It's inherent in their life movement. You see, this is not something that is rigid. These are vibrating themes that are there in the continuity, in the genes themselves. They're there. In that aspect of your differentiation, they're there. And it means that the whole phenomena, the whole process is there. The shaman, the ones who worked with drugs, and most of them did, and I'm talking about traditional shaman, they knew the joke. What gave them power was that they knew the pattern, because the patterns are eternal. They don't change. They're always there. There is a pattern that allows you to go through the door. There's a pattern that allows you to return. There are stages in the process, and they're all known. They're all known. All of them. It is the same with the genetic predisposition in any human being to fulfill their mystical spiritual potential. It's there. It's a formula. All that is lacking is correctness. That's all. And remember that when we speak of the genetic continuity of these themes, to understand that these are generics. This is a keynoting generic. There is the sublime of the uniqueness of your design, and all the things that go with that, and all the levels that are involved. But it's part of us. And for us, these ways, these are the last opportunities to live them, because they're going to fade. And we come to the third. The pressure to attune alters the form through rejection. Through rejection. Not this, not that. I guess it's as close to the Zen neti that you can find. The pressure to attune. And you can see the deep within the third line being, 3536. Deep, deep, deep within them is this way of getting rid of anything that's not mystical and not spiritual. Not that. Not this. Altering the form through rejection. And their process is beginning with respect. There is no deeper shattering on a bridge than the shattering of the third line being when the respect is lost. This movement from the respect of the traditions until the struggle for the attention of the elders. That they deserve respect. That they be seen. That they be recognized for what they are. No deeper need to discover, buried deep, deep, deep within the psyche of every third line personality. The call. The animal that shouts out that it exists. The demand for attention, the demand for divinity, the demand for spirituality. And it leads to the ability to adapt to shock, to be able to fail, and thus to be just and self-conscious on the path of self-consciousness, inner awareness. The pressure to attune leads to self-consciousness, leads to awareness. Nothing more profound than the ability to be just. It is an extraordinary gift of the third line being. We know that the lower trigram, because it is personal destiny, that the lower trigram is self-absorbed. It is. To be modest is self-absorbed. To be independent is self-absorbed. To be just, somewhere there is another. And it is the beginning of the opening of the door to the transpersonal process. That in self-consciousness one recognizes instantly that one is not alone. We come to the 4, the 5, and the 6. The upper trigram has different qualities. It simply does. So much of its viability is rooted in its capacity to integrate successfully with the other, and to know how to be in the world of the other. Every upper trigram line, no matter what gate it sits in, pays more attention to what it's not than what it is. It's always looking across the channel. It's always seeking out some sense of what is there. It is in the upper trigram that we take on our dualistic human nature. That is, we take on the binary in a larger sense, that we recognize the other, that ultimately genetically we're designed to be attracted, to bond, to reproduce, all of these things with the other. And so when you're looking at the mysticism that is rooted in the upper trigram, it is not about necessarily the personal process. In other words, that it is always connected in some way or another with the other. And the fourth line is line of influence. Here, the pressure to influence alters the form through persuasion. And you can see immediately this other, the adrenalized pressure to alter the form through persuasion, to convince the other, to influence the other. And yet, like all forms, they have to go through the bridge. They have to cross the bridge in their lifetime. They have to go from influencing the maintaining of tribal tradition to liberation from the influence of tribal tradition. That's quite a step. It is one of those things that is always interesting to me about the fourth line being, is that when they break out, they never really go far away. And what I mean by that is that, rather than breaking with the faith, they create a sect that is loosely related to it, if you know what I mean. Or rather than totally dropping their belief system, whatever it happens to be, that they retain certain aspects of it. But when they cross that bridge, to be drained by the challenge, now that is something. Giving of oneself, sacrificing oneself is one of the ways. We saint people who sacrifice themselves for others. In order for the fourth line being to truly transcend, that mutation begins with their readiness to sacrifice themselves for the other. Quite something to think about. I mean, you know that the fourth line carries themes of burnout and exhaustion. But these are mundane qualities, and this is not a mundane way. And to be drained by challenge, to accept the need for sacrifice, is to be able to survive it, and to be patient. Patience. Wow, is that ever something? The four, the great opportunist. To be patient is to understand the glory of creation. I mean, it's really what it's all about. We're all in a waiting game. Everything's a waiting game. When you're not in charge, when there's no choice, when you're in a program, you just wait. You just wait. You just wait and you watch. So to be ready to sacrifice is to bring survival, and not just survival for them, but survival for the other. And this beauty, this gift of patience. So the pressure to influence leads to the way of cooperation. When you get to the 5, you get to a universalizing principle. And you get to the call itself, the pressure to call. And the pressure to call alters the form through practicality. And practicality is the obvious that nobody sees until you tell them. The obvious nobody sees until you tell them. And the process that they go through, the bridge that they have to cross, is they have to move from this devotion to tribal tradition to liberation from the tribe's demands. Nothing more difficult for the 5 excuse me, than to deal with the projection field. The projection field is enormous. And the projection field brings demands even when demands are not articulated. And it's only when the 5 can be liberated from the demands that it can live out its heretical potential. But the moment that you back away from the demands of the tribe, they get very annoyed. They really do. And to do so, to be liberated from the demands of the tribe, is to embrace disorder. To embrace it, to be able to celebrate in the embrace of disorder, to be direct. This is the way of the form. If you're a 5-1 like me, or you're a 5-2, this is the theme of the personality. The pressure to call to the way of the form. Well, you all know that's what I do. The pressure to call. It's curious, my dog's barking. I don't know if you can hear that, but anyway. Just have a dog story for you tonight, but you'll just have to wait for that one. Let me get to the 6. The pressure to separate alters the form through sensitivity. I like that. It's something to grasp about 6-line beings, is that in their role as a model, when they are separate, they're most sensitive. It's just something so interesting about them. Separation and sensitivity are one and the same thing, as the call and practicality are one and the same thing, as influence and persuasion are one and the same thing. They are the whole that's greater than the sum of the parts of this combination of the adrenalized pressure and the emotional wave. And their bridge, to see the value of the tribe, but to be liberated from the elders. In other words, to see the benefit of the nurturing of the tribe, but not to be a child forever. And this liberation from the elders leads to the ability to separate from shock. Oh, how I wish that every 6-line being who is in their Kiran phase could be correct, so that they could separate from the shock. To be inappropriate. Inappropriate. You know, this is the thing that I love most about 6-line beings. They're not well understood, you know. They often seem odd. But they're supposed to be inappropriate. The best ones are inappropriate. You know, they say the wrong thing at the wrong time, or they sound funny, or whatever the case may be. They interject at the wrong moment, whatever it may be. There's something deeply, deeply inappropriate about them, because they're them. They are themselves. They're here to be examples. You know, this inappropriateness is the example and the way of wisdom. Of wisdom. Now, I talked about this last week, this, extraordinary power of what it means to have your own authority. I mean, what it means to live by your own authority. What it means not to have any other authority. I mean, it is extraordinary how many times in a day you bow down to someone's authority. It's quite something when you consider it. The not-self lives in a world where it is constantly kowtowing, constantly, to authority. And it's not the big authorities, the moral authorities, the legal authorities, the spiritual authorities, the employment authorities, the school authorities, the family authorities, and on and on and on. There's all these authorities. And they're constantly telling us what we're supposed to do. And the expectation is that we're supposed to do it. And whenever you look at all of these bridges, every bridge begins with acceptance leading to liberation. And liberation doesn't mean, other than in very specific places, rejection. It means simply what it's saying, liberation. I love this gate, deliverance. I love this word. You know, it's an extraordinary translation of the Chinese original. To be delivered. This is not about rejecting the tribe, denying the tribe, hating the tribe. It's not what it's about. It's about being liberated from the homogenized genetic pool. Liberated from it. Not because it is bad, because it is not you. And you can see that this bridge, because this is the spiritual bridge, this mystical bridge. Now this is the great challenge. And to also understand that 2027, this goes away as a global cycle. We've had an enormous spiritual revival in the last 400 years. Incredible. At every conceivable level. Whether it is the primitive, pseudo-primitive, neo-primitive, whatever kind of religion, sect, dogma, goo-goo, whatever it is, new age, old age, bad age, good age, it's all around today. It's everywhere. It's the dying light. I mean, it's the dying light. And most of it just fades, and that's it. I mean, the thing about the time that we live in, what is a window of perhaps the next 100 years or so, this is the real opportunity for our kind, Homo sapiens sapien, our kind, to fulfill our process on this plane. To not only be correct within the form and surrender to the correctness of the form, but to experience transcendent consciousness, the fulfillment of what it is to be us. And when I say transcendent consciousness, I have no fucking idea what that means. I don't. Because it's so unique. It's you. Nobody else. No comparison. No measurement. Singularity. Little points of awakened singularity. This is what it's about. The mystical stuff is nice. It's all nice. It's just a deep, 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 deep indication of how incredibly sophisticated our programming is. How many nuances there are. How many ways we can look and see. And in the depth of that seeing, what we see is this construct that in the end, we can only experience from our passenger's perspective. Nothing else. To enrich the passenger, to enlighten the passenger, to awaken the passenger, to educate the passenger. This is what it's about. So that you can see your genetic continuity alive in you, in your life. You know. And to see it within the context of your own uniqueness, to see it within the context of your design. Your this and that, your motivation, your determination, your tonal infrastructure, the whole movie. You know, when you first meet human design, you have to think about your experiment. You have to think about living your strategy. You have to think about it. Like a child learning how to ride a bicycle. You have to think about keeping your balance. You have to think about the things you have to do. But you get to notice after a while that you are this and that. The generator, the projector, the manifestor, whatever it may be. the reflector. And over a certain period of time, and it differs depending on who you are, it suddenly becomes, well, you don't have to think about it anymore. It's just there. It's part of you. It's like learning how to ride that bicycle. And you see all the themes that can be explored in human design. When you're the passenger and the bicycle is your life, and you know how to ride, then you can see the poetry of what it is to be you. You can see your magic. You can see that you are fulfilling the potential of your formula. Your formula. And for the passenger, there is nothing more important than confirmation, affirmation. That the passenger needs to see these things. Needs to be able to nod its illusionary head in agreement. Yeah, that's true, that's true, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Nod, nod, nod. It enriches the passenger every time. The mechanics are clear to it. And not clear to it out of somebody else's authority, my authority, anybody else's authority that knows this knowledge. Clear to them because they see it. They live it. They watch it. They are it. And that's what happens in correctness. It's not like you have to seek any of these things. It's not like you have to make them happen or bring them to the surface. There's no ritual that is necessary. There's only strategy and authority. I mean, truly, there isn't anything else. There's just strategy and authority. And once you get to the point that you have entered into your experiment, so that strategy and authority is a natural process for you, then you begin this opening of this perfect drama. The perfect drama that's you. Yeah? It's what I so love about the way. I'm a fan of Shakespeare. And I love the play. I truly do. And I see that only when you recognize your helplessness within the drama can you begin to enjoy it. You know, can you truly be the audience that your movie deserves? You know, not somebody shouting at the bloody screen. You know, the magic of being entertained by your life. I mean, entertained by it. You know what that's like when you're entertained. You have a good time. Time flies. You have these wonderful cathartic moments. You know, you have the pleasure of the process. And you're satisfied. No logic system worth its salt can deny you satisfaction. It's what logic is all about. It's why we love logic. If it works, it's satisfying. How satisfying it is to be able to see, to watch, to live your movie. Not to direct it, not to act in it, not to be a critic of it, but to be the audience. The audience, just watching. Then you get to see that keynotes are not keynotes, but they're aspects of you, and they're alive. And you can taste them and feel them and smell them and see them and hear them. They're coming out of you. And you can watch what that means for you and for the other. You can see who's there and who's not there. You can see what this life is about. And it's so simple. Whoever you meet, wherever you share human design, I know how much fun it is to talk about all the incredible stuff. All little tidbits of knowledge and insight. It's wonderful, I know. But when somebody meets this knowledge, all they need to understand is the experiment, and that it'll change their life. I mean, that's the point. It changes their life at every conceivable level and opens up the possibility for magic. You know, I've mentioned it before that as many as half of the beings that are on Earth today, this is their last incarnation. We're going into a population decline. The available vehicles are going to be limited. We're at the end of a cycle, the Eden cycle. This is the closing round. This is the end of our special line. You know, we're moving towards this time of lack of fertility and creativity and innovation. Here is our window, this, 100 years in front of us as we move through the phase. And I say 100 years because basically the potential of this quality of transcendence is something that's going to be inbred in anyone who is born before 2027. And if you assume the generation born in 2026, early 2027, that this generation, if they live approximately to 80, 90, 100 years, we have about 100-year altogether window in which this form of the way survives. And with the keys that we have, with the revelation of human design, there are tools for those that are on the fractal to complete this process. It's what I'm here for as a messenger. It's the only thing that I'm here for. I mean, I'm a form messenger, and I know that the form is absolute in the Maya. If the form is correct, everything else will be correct. If you follow this process, you know, those that you meet, what you get from this is the only opportunity that you're going to have. The only opportunity to truly fulfill your purpose on this plane. It's quite something to consider. This is the end of something. And it's part of, you know, there's a whole generation of human design people now being educated at a very, very profound level in many different areas, all of which is laying a foundation to be of service to the generations that are coming. I mean, this is one of the most important things to understand about our work, is that yes, there are deep benefits to each of us individually in our unique process, but to recognize that as a collective, that we have a responsibility to share this knowledge with others, and we have a responsibility to those generations that are going to have to deal with the change of the cycle, are not going to have the support systems and the backup systems that we have had and that have been, so supportive of this process. But this is the peaking of it. You know, we need to be able to make sure that there is a transference of this knowledge so that the generations that come, that they can operate correctly as themselves according to their own authority. And that they have just as much a chance and just as much a right as you and I to live the purpose of our incarnation. And not simply our incarnation. I mean, it's all closing down. You know, we're about to end a very long evolutionary process. And there will be a huge change and another direction that will be taken. We're completing the process of incarnating into bioforms. And depending on the reproductive mechanism of mutative differentiation to produce the mutations that we need to advance the form principle. Wow, that's a bitch. That's a long process. It goes on forever. It's taken 4 million years, 4 billion years on this planet to be able to go through the endless genetic reproductive program to get to the sophistication of the forms we have now. It's not very efficient, folks. It's not. Yet we are at the peak of this process. We are an awful long way from amoebas. We have really reached a place in which the form principle has been truly exalted. And it's not like it's evidenced in the world around us. This is a sewer where flowers grow occasionally. The planet is a terrible place. Its frequency is horrendous. The lack of awareness on this planet is unbelievable. And yet that's not the point. There are tens of millions of beings who are struggling across this 3740 bridge right now. This is where they are. You know them. You've been there. You know the not self, and something is not quite right. You feel it in your gut. You feel it in your belly. You feel it in the continuity of your 40th gate principle. Somehow, somewhere inside of you, this need to be free, to be liberated from this or that, whatever the hell it is. It's there. There are millions of them out there, not billions. Tens of millions. And there's a part of them in their belly that is yearning for liberation. And they don't know how to get there. And it's not that they don't try. They fill up churches and mosques and temples and you name it. They pack all of the New Age lecture circuit. They try. It's part of the 3740 bridge. Don't you know these people when they get very old and they're dying and they never got across? You know all kinds of them that never got across, that never reached liberation. We're all here to reach liberation. We are all here to reach liberation, every single one of us. Truly. And to be liberated simply from not being homogenized. Not being pulled into the flotsam and jetsam of conditioning. Not losing our identity, our purpose, our nature, our health, our life. They're all looking for liberation. They are. And the rest, the billions, you can see them in the 37 themes. This is where they are. This is where they stay. And nothing will move them. Nothing. It's fractal lines, after all. These are the ones that hold the cultural, religious institutions together. And are they going to have trouble as we move into this new era, where there is no longer the cyclical 4037 for support. How radical they will become in trying to influence the others, or get them to be more and more devoted, or see the greater value, or on and on and on. We already see the beginning of this backlash in the intensity of what we call fundamentalism. This is the 37 force. Everyone is here to live out the formula. We are formulas. We are unique formulas. And then you can really get rid of something. You can get rid of thinking about the importance of what it is to be you. You know, we're deeply connected to our vehicles. It's the illusion that mind brings us. And we're so deeply connected to our vehicles that it's hard for most human beings to understand that it's not theirs at all. At all. And when you finally can let go, truly let go of being that person, then you have your seeing. And there's everything to see. And everything to share. The beauty, the magic of the unique vision. It's something that has inspired us through the ages. And we have always seen it as an anomaly, a miracle. Well, we're all capable of such miracles. I'm convinced of that. The voice told me a lot of strange things. A lot of strange things. And much of what was difficult to grasp was the whole way in which consciousness has evolved on a universal scale. The movement of the crystals of consciousness, the bundling of the crystals of consciousness. According to the voice, after what would for us be absolutely incredible lengths of time, that the crystals of consciousness always bundle, and that they start another process or enter into another process. The crystals of consciousness here on this planet, all the personality crystals in the bundles of the atmosphere, the vast design crystal bundle in the mantle of the earth, beneath the mantle of the earth, all the consciousness in form, that all of these crystals, according to the voice, when we reach the end of the round, which is about 1,300 years away, that all of the crystals of consciousness will once again bundle. According to that mythology, there will be in fact an end of days. That is apocalypse, whatever you want to call any of those things. It is clear that something is simply going to bang into the earth, and that'll just simply end the experiment of life in that sense on this planet. The crystals of consciousness, according to the voice, when they rebundle, which will be millions of years after the end of the round, they will have a new form. It has a name. I don't know if it's a name, initials, symbols. I really don't know. It's like rave. I only saw it. I never heard it. I call it Eron because that's what it looked like. E-R-O-N, Eron. And the Eron's a very complex form, though it's not a bioform. And in this cosmology program, in year 2, I will be doing Erons and Eron design, and that's about as far out as I get. The thing that fascinates me about the Eron is that it is a trinary crystal creature, thing. I mean, think about the totality as the way I like to anthropomorphize it. Think about it as an unborn child, if you know, just to put it that way. And compare it in the microcosm to what it is to be a child in the womb. It's obvious. Certain things are very obvious. One of the things that's obvious is you can't possibly know the world you belong to when you're in the womb. You can't. There just simply isn't a way. There's something else that we know. That is, we know that the vehicle in the womb for, you know, whatever the time is of from conception to 88 degrees of the sun before birth, in that frame, whether it's the full 6 months or less, That at that point, 88 degrees of the sun before birth, only then does the personality crystal arrive. And only then does the being have its binary potential. According to the voice, the totality does not have its personality. I think it's obvious to all of us from the mundane plane that we do not share the oneness that we speak of. We do not share a oneness of consciousness on this plane. We don't. Something that Aerons are evolving to experiment with, shared consciousness, to prepare us ultimately for what it is to be Aerons. And according to the voice, when the next phase of the evolutionary program continues, the next time that consciousness is endowed into form, that there are going to be two crystals that are derived from this plane. That is, the crystals, one crystal will come from what we call human, and one crystal will come from what we have always called animal. So the personality crystal of a human and the personality crystal of a mammal will become what in effect are design crystals of an Aeron. And that the Aeron will be endowed with the personality crystal, because according to the voice, the totality's personality will enter into the universe, will enter into the biverse at this point and shatter and seed all of these forms with what in essence is a uniform personality consciousness. These trinary crystal entities, Aerons, that one of their components is mammals. And mammals are really my theme in this story. We are cursed by being a bioform. That means that we are cursed because we have to eat, and if you have to eat, you have to kill. And we are designed to be strategically superior to anything on the planet. And so we have become the greatest of all killers that one can imagine. I want you to think about the evolutionary karma. I want you to think about the evolutionary karma of sharing your existence with a crystal of something that you ate for dinner or that you butchered aimlessly. Mostly it was eating for dinner. It was one of the first things that caught me about 19th century theosophical thought, was their deep concern and respect for the mammalian plane. And their beliefs that our relationship to mammals was something that had to change in order for us to fulfill whatever it was, their concepts of our destiny and purpose. In the news lately, there's this book by Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code, that everybody talks about. Old story, anyway. And I can remember reading Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which was supposedly one of the things that inspired it. The story of Jesus surviving the crucifixion and dying in Afghanistan and blah, 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 and all these stories. The resurrection story. I think the resurrection story is probably one of the most fascinating stories that we have in religious mythology. The very concept of rising from the dead is, it's quite something to think about. And it is all, the dream of being eternal, the dream of defying death is something that's very much part of the psyche of a bioform that must die. When was going through my deconstruction process. This was in 1986, and in 1986 I had a dog, and his name was Barley. I called him Barley Baker. I gave him a last name. I figured he deserved a last name. And Barley Baker was what you would call a mutt, mixed breed dog, fairly large creature. And he had had a very strange beginning because the daughter of a friend of mine, she coming home from school heard a strange sound in a little gully beside the road and discovered a bag of puppies that somebody had tied up and just, slung out somewhere. And she was able to save one of them. And that became my dog. She gave that puppy to me. And I guess it was because of the way in which Barley started his life, but Barley had an enormous distaste for human beings. He was fine with me. I looked after him from literally very close to his beginnings. He was probably no more than 3 days old, 4 days old. But he couldn't stand people. He would go away whenever people would show up. And in late summer of 1986, I moved into the Rowena, the place where I would have my encounter. And I moved in there with Barley. And in hindsight, I can understand that he was a magical creature. I was so intensely into my process that I don't think I had the perception of him that was clear, being a 5 anyway. Hard to see sometimes in your projection. And I had nothing. I had lived without resources for a long time and could not afford to feed the dog, let alone myself. I had no money. I had no access to money. I hadn't touched money in God knows how long. And so Barley hunted, and he hunted sheep, which meant that he got shot quite often. And I would find him and pull buckshot out of him. One time he got shot quite badly, and one of the shotgun pellets went into his hanging ear, and he got used to letting me pull the things out. It wasn't very pleasant for him, but he wouldn't let me touch that ear, and it was very bizarre because eventually skin sort of grew over it, but he looked like a dog with an earring. He should have been a Hell's Angel or something. He was vicious. I watched him kill another dog at my feet. He was a strange creature. As a matter of fact, I was walking along the road one day with Barley, and after he'd killed this dog, and a police car pulled up, and 2 Guardia Civil police officers, the local national police, got out of their car, with their swagger and their guns, and they came over and asked me if that was my dog. And it was kind of like what my son would say duh to, and I said to them, no, he's not mine. And of course Barley's just sort of standing there in the background around me, and they're looking at me like I'm nuts, and they said, it's your dog? And I said, no, it's not mine. And then they asked me if I knew that my dog had killed another dog, and I said yes. And then they were silent, and I said, well, are you going to arrest him? It was a very funny moment in my life. They didn't know what to do. Anyway, finally they said to me, look, you put a leash on your dog. And I said, look, it's not my dog. And it's really what I felt about Barley. He was wild. I didn't feed him. It wasn't like I looked after him. I had one phase that was very bizarre in itself. There was a little tienda not far from the Rowena. And I went in there one day, and there was this woman in there, Maria. She died a few years ago. When I knew her, she was already, I don't know. It was hard to tell. She was either 70 or 90 or God knows what. It was hard to tell. And I went in one day and asked her if I could put 6 tins of dog food on a cuenta, on a bill. And she sort of looked at me and she said, "You want anything else?" Her assumption was that I was going to eat it. And it was very sweet. And I said, no, I don't need anything else. And so I did that for a while, but I was building up this, what to me was a huge bill. I don't know, eventually it was about what would be maybe today $150, something like that. And I had no way, absolutely no way of being able to repay that. And one day at the Rowena, a man shows up whom I did not know. Somebody had told him that there was this weird guy living at this place, and he had decided to come and see me. And he said to me he had a problem, and I said, "Well, what's your problem?" And he said that he had a new girlfriend, and she was pregnant. And he asked me what he should do, and I said, "Well, you already did it." And I went off to do my thing. And when I came back to the Rowena, he was gone. I was quite relieved. Integration beings at their worst. And I go inside the Rowena, and on top of in the Rowena there was there was a board that acted as a desk, and on that desk was what was a 5,000 peseta bill, which was it was a lot of money then. And yeah, I was very pleased. How nice, a lovely gift. And so I got dressed to walk down to the tienda, and I pick up this bill, and it was all new bills, so it wasn't one, it was many of them. It was very weird. And I was able to pay Maria, who was very happy. She asked me if I was going to buy food, and I said no. Anyway, on the evening of my encounter with the voice, I've told this story many times, but when I arrived at the Rowena, it was nightfall. Barley had picked up my scent, and he came running just to me. And as I approached the Rowena, there was a light underneath the door. And, that was very shocking to me. I had no money, I had no candles. There was a kerosene lantern that hung over my bunk, but it was bone dry. It hadn't any kerosene in it as long as I knew that place. It was a very ancient door with a very odd iron key, big iron key, and I had the only key, and the door was locked. So I was really, it was a very shocking moment. And I approached the door like not knowing at all what the hell was going on. And I shouted, which is one of the funnier, more ironic shouts of my life. I said, "Who's there?" I didn't know that who was about to happen, but nonetheless, "Who's there?" There was obviously no answer. Anyway, I put the key in the door and I opened the door. As I opened the door, I mean, it's one of those things that are just burnt into my re-seeing of this moment. As the door swung open, my eye caught the lantern, the kerosene lantern, because it was lit and it was spinning counterclockwise for information freaks, but it was spinning. And at the same time that I was conscious of that, I was also conscious of Barley crossing the threshold of the door and collapsing, and I can only describe it as collapsing as if, you've been shot. Not the way a dog lies down or a creature lies down, but this was just, a collapse, a complete collapse. And I couldn't pay much attention to that because all of that is simultaneous, and in that moment was the voice, and that that put me in a state of shock. I had liquid pouring from my body. I had the resonance of this strange voice, "Are you ready to work?" in my head. At some point, I dragged Barley and stuffed him literally, in a sense. I sort of pushed him underneath what was this board that was over some blockies, acting as a desk, so he was underneath that. He wasn't alive. And it was obvious to me that he wasn't alive. I mean, there was no breathing. There was no heartbeat. There was no movement. He stayed under the desk for 8 days. I mean, 8 days. When I was drawing the pictures, the very first body graphs and the channels and all of that, my feet were on his body. Now, the body was not cold. And I mean, it was also bizarre, right? So 8 days, 8 days, he lay under that desk. On the final morning of my encounter, I was told to leave the ruina and climb up on the mountain behind. This was a place where, it was my special place. It was a place where I could just sit and stare, and the vista was magnificent, and there were no beings. And so I went up the mountain, leaving Barley under the desk. And I had my final experience with the voice. And when it was all done, I came down the hill, and as I'm walking down, there comes Barley, wagging his tail, full of piss and vinegar. I fell down in, I was ready to go back and dig a grave. See, Barley resurrected. I mean, he came back to life. I realized when I saw him that I had to find some way to free him. I had a friend of mine who had bought some property in the wildest part of the island. There are very few people. And one day I took Barley out there and walked around with him a bit. I sat down on a rock and I looked at him and I said, live out your life. Do what you can. And I left him. I went back about a year later, went up into the hills in the area where I left him, called a couple of times, whistled a couple of times, and he showed up with a female, 2 or 3 young pups. Never actually approached me. Sort of stood about 10 meters away and looked at me. And then went away. Never saw him again. And from, that experience all those years ago, I see mammals in a very different way. I understand that at some point there is a reward for their service as well, and that theirs is a consciousness that is very unique and very special, and so is their experience in the incarnative process. And for me, it brought something very special. The Abyss event next week. I'm doing the Architecture of Life series. And that's only because of Barley. Because when Barley had collapsed and he was under the table, in the first evening of my process, I was very concerned someplace inside of me about him. And on the second day, when I began to draw graphs, it was because of Barley, because it was in my head. Does he have a design? And it was then that I was given the form designs. And for me, the magic of knowing the design of the inanimate and the design of insects and plants and fish and all of that is because of Barley. So he was a real Messiah, a resurrected dog. Bless him wherever he may be. Anyway, it's my mystical story for you. Rave Cosmology is a pleasure, and I enjoy sharing it with you, and I enjoy looking at these themes. I think they're very important that this knowledge is witnessed. And yeah, I look forward to being able to do a full semester on Bardo states, on the dying process, on death, and to begin to develop, I think, very important skills to be able to help human beings leave this plane correctly. It's part of the process. And for all of you, wherever you are, be entertained. It's what it's all about. And those of you that are coming to Ibiza, or those of you that are already here, welcome Genoa to the island. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you. So, until the beginning of the next semester, the 18th, bye for now.